What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now, today I'm bringing to you my guide on how to beat Paleozoic. I've already released a video guide as an introduction to Paleozoic discussing how trap monsters work and how the deck functions at a very basic level. So if you haven't already seen that video, I'd highly recommend checking it out. But this video is for the player that really wants to know how to beat Paleozoic, the best options, the best cards, and kind of some good in-depth strategy on how to beat the deck, considering it is still one of the best decks of the current format. So, as you guys know, if you're familiar with the series, I like to kind of break down these videos into different segments because there are a ton of cards that we could cover, but I kind of like to group them just so you have an idea kind of what to look for. So for this video, we're gonna have three separate groups. We have cards for disruption, cards for negation, and then we also have going after Totally Awesome itself, because Totally Awesome is arguably the biggest threat that that deck poses to any opponent. Now, before we get started, Paleozoic is a very interesting deck because it functions in such an unorthodox way compared to most decks that it actually has not as many weaknesses as most popular meta decks might. I mean, usually when there's a meta deck, there's so many different cards that you can usually use to help counter it that there's a lot of options out there. But Paleozoic is actually kind of on the low end in terms of how wide your scope of options are, just because the deck uses trap monsters and because it plays such a slow game and it doesn't exactly play the game you might expect a highly competitive deck to play. So that means we need to adjust our strategy accordingly. So starting off with disruption, I feel like disruption is probably the most viable way to handle Paleozoic for a couple different reasons. First off, if you're able to play cards that can chain in response to the activation of your opponent's trap card, that means that they're not going to be able to special summon a Paleozoic monster as a result of that. So having a way to disrupt it not only for the effect of our disruptive card, but nullifying the Paleozoic monster from being special summoned is honestly more important than anything. So a card that's really popular in the meta right now is DD Crow, and it just so happens that DD Crow doubles amazingly well against Paleozoic because not only can you banish the Paleozoic monsters out of our opponent's graveyard, but you can also banish cards like Lost Wind or all these other really powerful graveyard-based cards that the Paleozoic deck runs. But if your opponent activates a Paleozoic trap card in their back row, you can chain the DD Crow. Not only can you just banish a card, but then you're also cutting off their ability to special summon a Paleozoic from the graveyard, and that's just going to pay off so much in the long run because if they don't have the resources, they can't go into their Totally Awesomes or their other rank 2s, and they're going to definitely be slowed down tremendously. Now, there are some other ways we can disrupt our opponent as well, but they're a little bit more niche and specific to the archetype itself. Pretty much anything that would just be negating trap cards. I'm talking about things like Trap Stun or Wiretap. Trap Stun's really cool because you can essentially just flip it outright, and then your opponent is locked out of playing any of their Paleozoic or non-Paleozoic traps for that matter for the remainder of the turn. So you know, as the opposing player, that you can just go off and do whatever the fuck you want, and being able to get off your plays without a hitch against a deck that's so reliant on its disruptive back row to be able to effectively function and recur advantage can just pay off so much in the long run, and being able to just establish your board. Paleozoic is not a deck that likes to play from behind. It's a deck that likes to control the board and really do what it does best to pretty much win the game outright from there. Wiretap's really cool as well because being a counter trap, it means that your opponent can't chain any additional trap cards to the activation of Wiretap, so that means they're going to be locked out of their Paleozoics from there. So cutting off that chain's really good, but Wiretap also stops non-Paleozoic trap cards like Dimensional Barrier or even Solemn Strike or Solemn Warning because it's spell speed 3, and having a card with that sort of flexibility in the matchup is really, really big. We've started seeing players using Wiretap in the sideboard, specifically going against the Paleozoic matchup, knowing that it is such a powerful card, and they don't really have an out to it other than an OLENOIDES that hits it before Wiretap has the chance to activate and really get its full value. Now then we also have cards that pretty much just hit spell and trap removal in general. We got cards like Twin Twister and Cosmic Cyclone. Now arguably, it's kind of hard to say which one's better because Twin Twister's really good because you can go 2 for 2 and really just kind of start hitting the back row hard. But the problem with Twin Twister is if they chain one of those trap cards, which more than likely because it's a Paleozoic deck, they're going to be able to chain those cards that are in the back row. They're just going to be able to summon off a Paleozoic anyway, and you're actually going to minus off that exchange unless you Twin Twister them in the end phase. This is why specifically for the Paleozoic matchup, I actually kind of prefer Cosmic Cyclone. It may have a 1,000 life point cost, which really isn't anything in the grand scheme of things, but the fact that it only hits one card is really powerful. The fact that it banishes the card that it hits, meaning if you hit a Paleozoic monster in the back row, they're really going to be slowed down because that's one less resource they have to work with later on. But the fact that you could just chain Cosmic Cyclone in response to any of your opponent's Paleozoic cards, kind of similarly to how DD Crow functions as well, it's a really powerful card because you're not losing a card out of your hand like you would with Twin Twister, because more than likely they're just going to be chaining it anyway. So if they do, you're not really losing out on too much. And plus, like I said, if it's a Paleo trap, you're going to be banishing it from the game anyway, so it's a resource that they're not going to get back. Whereas opposed to Twin Twister, if you hit 2 Paleozoic traps, like, you're pretty much fucked, and you almost just went -2 at that point, if anything. So now I want to get into negation, because negation's probably the biggest thing that you can do and just flat out win against this deck in general. Now when I say negation, I'm talking about negation that pretty much flat out stops the opposing player from doing any of their cards, almost floodgating to an extent. But this is where cards like DENKO SEKKA come in. DENKO SEKKA against the Paleozoic matchup, if they do not have a Solemn Warning or some form of normal summon negation, they are literally just fucked if that card sticks. Now, arguably, Paleozoic does have outs to DENKO SEKKA. I mean, they've got number 45. They've got, I mean, they could just make it totally awesome and run over it because they have their Frog Engine supplementing the Paleozoics to pretty much summon these totally awesomes without needing the Paleozoic monsters themselves. So yes, there are outs to DENKO SEKKA, but you have to think in the grand scheme of things, if you have roughly 80% of their deck on lock, and they don't have the answer for it, and if you have a way, possibly like a hand trap or some other way to protect that DENKO SEKKA as well, like if you have a DD Crow backing up your DENKO SEKKA to prevent them from going into their totally awesome play, then you are just going to win that game outright, because DENKO SEKKA being able to immediately shut down the back row can sometimes be all you need, and that's why you see it's a very popular option for a lot of players in the competitive meta. Now, there are cards like Royal Decree as well. Royal Decree is a good alternative to DENKO SEKKA, but I think the problem with Royal Decree is that Royal Decree can be easily outed by cards like Twin Twister. Even they can chain Paleozoic OLENOIDES to the Royal Decree itself, so then it's just going to get destroyed, and then they're going to have all their stuff back online. I feel like Decree is much more susceptible to so many more forms of spot removal compared to DENKO SEKKA, because Decree, when it hits the board, it's not like DENKO SEKKA where immediately everything is shut off. They do have the option to respond to it. So theoretically, they could just chain all of their back row, and even if the Decree does stick, they've already gotten all the value out of their cards anyway, and it really doesn't matter in the long run. Now, the last card I do want to talk about is Jinzo, because Jinzo, in this instance, is just the grown-up version of DENKO SEKKA, because it does require a tribute. That is something to keep in mind, but if Jinzo hits the board, Paleozoic players are fucking in for it, because it essentially has the exact same effect as DENKO SEKKA. Difference being is that it has 2400 attack, meaning it's not going to get run over by something like Totally Awesome. They would need to just find some other way, maybe something like number 45. But the other cool thing about Jinzo as well is that if you're playing quick play spell cards in your deck, you're still able to capitalize and use those cards as well to help protect your Jinzo to keep it online. And you'll see some strategies using Jinzo like Metal Foes because they can pendulum summon it out, even Burning Abyss, cards that don't, or decks rather, that don't really rely on the normal summon because they can just special out a monster, tribute summon for the Jinzo, and they can just call it a day. Now for the last category I want to discuss, it's cards that specifically target Totally Awesome, because Totally Awesome is the biggest thing you have to worry about with this deck, other than the plethora of traps you're going to have to play through. But Totally Awesome is a problem, and if you don't have a way to really out it on top of all their back row, then you could just be completely screwed. So I did want to mention a couple ways to out Toad. One of them is just using Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. You know, if you're going second, you could side the Ghost Reaper, and you could just have a Totally Awesome in your side deck as well. You call Totally Awesome, all the Toads are gone, and they lost a lot of steam in their deck just from that one interaction alone, because they don't really have a go-to rank 2 other than maybe Opabinia in that case that really helps further their game state or helps protect their board even more than what they already have accumulated. Then you've got cards like Xyz Encore. Xyz Encore is actually one of my favorite cards against this deck, because what you can do is, since it's a quick play, you can activate it during the draw phase, and you can actually prevent the Totally Awesome from special summoning the Dupe Frog in the standby phase, and then the Totally Awesome's off the board, they can't chain anything to it due to Xyz Encore's effect, and then they're just going to have their Toads back on the board, and you can easily clean up from there. And last but not least, I do want to talk about Forbidden Chalice. Forbidden Chalice kind of falls in the disruption category as well, because it can be used to disrupt things other than Toad, but being able to Chalice a Toad and prevent it from being able to negate any of your cards is absolutely huge, ensuring that your plays go off, and you can go off with your plays and then just Chalice the Toad when need be, so that's really cool. And because it's a quick play, again, it has that flexibility to disrupt the Paleozoic players as well. Now, one other card, I didn't really know which category to put it in, I guess it would kind of go in the Floodgate category, is Necro Valley. I cannot stress how powerful Necro Valley is against the Paleozoic matchup now that we have the errata. Necro Valley now prevents cards that would revive themselves from the graveyard or move themselves to a different place from doing so, and since the Paleozoic monsters do that, that means that Necro Valley completely shuts down the graveyard access for Paleozoics, and since Necro Valley is a field spell, we can search it with Terraforming, and if you really want to go all out, you can just add a couple copies of Gravekeeper's Commandant as well, meaning you have 9 ways to access Necro Valley if you want to go that far, and it's just a really cool card in general. Being able to lock out their advantage like that can really hurt them and set them back, and Necro Valley is a threat that they really just have to deal with, otherwise that's going to be a losing uphill battle. But guys, that's going to be it for my guide on how to beat Paleozoic. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think on your best strategies and advice on how to beat Paleozoic. I'd really love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.